Daf Nun Tes Amud Aleph, right at the top. We discussed previously that if there's a bell that's used for a child, it's not considered a kli l'kabel tuma unless the bell was attached unless the clapper was attached to the bell. Without the clapper, it can't make the sound. The purpose of the bell is to ring, either to soothe the child to sleep or to indicate where it was. Without the clapper and the bell, it's not a completed kli. A kli that's not complete is not susceptible to tuma. Tuma is not on raw materials. Tuma is on a kli. It has to be a completed kli. Now, the question was that we had discussed before that Omar Marim Nitlin V'Leim Adain Tumas Aleim. If the clapper was removed, it's still Makabel Tuma. The Tuma still is retained over there, rather. If there was a tuma that it became tomei with, the fact that the clapper is removed from the bell does not render it a broken kli. A broken kli, if the kli was tomei and it broke, it's no longer tomei. If the clapper was removed from the bell, it does not render it a broken kli, and the tuma remains. And the question was that why it should be considered still a kli that's intact. We see that they're considered a chibur. The clapper and the bell are considered a chibur, one and the same. And if tuma comes into contact with one, the other is tomei. If something tomei comes in contact with the bell, the clapper is tomei, and vice versa. So we see it's one. Why shouldn't it be considered a broken kli? So the one teretz we gave, Rava said that it can still be used for the same purpose. It can be used for the purpose, you can bang it, clang it on a cheres, on a piece of shard of clay. It can still make the noise, so it still retains its original function. Therefore, even though it's broken, a kli that's broken has to be broken kishiur. It has to be broken with a shiur that makes it no longer usable for its original purpose. Over here, since it can still be used to make the noise, to clang, it's not considered broken with the shear that will make it rendered a broken kli, which is no longer tomei. Idmar nami, Amar Yosef Rav Chanina, Hoil v'Roy Lakishal Gabi Cheres. The same explanation, that it can still be used for the same function to bang it, clang it on cheres. Rav Yochanan Amar, he says no. Hoil v'Roy Lagame by Maim Latinak. Rav Yochanan says apparently that it does not have to retain the same function, as long as it has a usable purpose. Now, without the clapper, the bell can be used as a container, and you can draw water with it, and you can give that water to a child. It can be used as a cup, as a container. So it still is usable. So if it's therefore usable, it's not considered to be a broken kli, and therefore it retains its tuma. So apparently the machlokes over here is a broken kli. When we say it's broken and it is no longer tomei, it loses its tomei. It seems to be that the question is, does it have to retain its original function, or as long as it has a function, as long as it's usable? So it would seem to be that Rav Yosef Rav Chanina would be saying that it has to retain its original purpose, but it does because it's royal akishal gabe cheres. And Rav Yochanan says you don't even need that reason, because it does not have to retain its original function as long as it's usable. And it is usable as a cup, as a vessel, therefore it's still considered a kli and it does not lose its tuma. So it seems to be a machlokes when we say a kli that's broken, it loses its tuma, the tuma departs from it. Do we say broken means that it no longer has its original function? Or does it mean broken means that it has no function whatsoever? So that seems to be the machlokes. Does the kli have to retain its original function to retain the tuma, or as long as it has any useful purpose? Is it so that Rav Yochanan does not require to have its original function? We learn the brisa it says that any kli that is a kli that's a zav would sit on, a kli that's used for sitting. So that is Mekabel Tumas Medras. that's makabel tumas medras, and it's an avatuma, and it's susceptible to tuma. And even if the zav does not touch it, as long as his weight is on it, it has this tuma. So it has to be, however, as we'll see, it has to be a kli that's designated for the purposes of sitting. So yachal kafa so v'yashav aleha. You might think if a person took a barrel that contains a saw, 6 kabin, and he sat on it, kafa tarkav, or a half a saw, 3 kabin, v'yashav aleha yehe tomei. So you might think, well, if a person, the zav sat on a barrel, now he's sitting on it, you might think it's tomei, tamud loima. We say no. It says v'chol kli asher yeshev alav hazav. It says not in the past tense. It doesn't say yashav. It doesn't say in the past tense. It says in the future tense. Asher yeshev misham yuchal yeshiva. So it has to be something that will be used for sitting. It has to be a kli that is designated for sitting. So if it's a chair, for instance, and the zav sits on that, that's designated for sitting. It has as makabel the tuma of medras. But yatzazeh, a barrel, we exclude a barrel. Yatzazeh sharm lo amoid v'nas malachteinu. If the zav would be sitting on the barrel, it's not designated for sitting. So people would say, amoid, stand up. We want to use it for our purposes. We want to use it to put to contain things over here, to put liquid into it. So you see that in order to makabel tumas medras, it has to be something that's miyuchad for yeshiva. It has to be miyuchad for yeshiva. Now Rashi explains, so that means is that it's 2 points to it. It has 2 aspects to it. Number one is that to begin with, it's not makabel tumas medras unless it's a kli that's used, that's designated for yeshiva, for sitting. So therefore, if a zav sat on a barrel, it's not makabel tumas medras. It doesn't have the tumas medras. That's one aspect of it, that it's not makabel the tumas medras to begin with, unless it's miyuchad yeshiva. The second aspect of it is that if it was a kli that's miyuchad yeshiva, and it was makabel tumas medras, and now it broke. Now, even if it has another function, it has another use, but if it's no longer miyuchad yeshiva, if it's no longer designated, it cannot be used for the original purpose, it cannot be used me'ein malachta rishayna, then it is no longer tomei. The tuma departs from it. So it's not makabel tumas medras unless, to begin with, it's designated for yeshiva, number one. And number two is it does not retain its tumas medras if it can no longer be used for its original purpose. So we see that by tumas medras, we say that it has to be roy, it has to be me'ein malachta rishayna. Now, where do we say it has to have its original use? It has to have that designated use. That's by tumas medras. But we do not say it by toma mes. By toma mes, we do not say it has to have its original function. Now, as Rashi explains, by tumas mes, we don't mean to say over here that it has to be used for a mes. That's not what we mean over here, because by tumas mes, all kalim are susceptible to tumas mes. What we mean over here is that does it have to retain its original function? If a kli was makabel tumas mes and it broke, and it can be used, but no longer for the original purpose, so over here, Rabbi Lazar says it's still tomei. We don't say it's tohar. It's considered like a kli that's broken less than the kashir. It still has a use, it's still useful, it still can be used. Even if it's not the original use, it's still tomei. We say this by medras, but we don't say it by tumas meis. But Rav Yochanan says, no, we apply this principle by tumas meis as well. And if the kli is broken and it's no longer usable for its original purpose, then it's no longer tomei. So therefore, in our case, by the bell and the clapper, now Rav Yochanan says, even if it's not roy to make a sound, to make the noise, a clanking sound, but it can be used as a container, as a cup, to give the water to the tinuk. It's tamei. Well, isn't that a contradiction to what he's saying over here, that even by Tumas Meis it has to have the original function? The bell originally was used to clang. So why is it tamei if it can be used for a different function, to draw water, to give water to a child? The Gemara says, Ebo Kamaisa. In Hanami, we have to say that the original case, by the case of the bell, the positions are reversed. That Rav Yochanan says it's tamei because roy lakish al gabe cheres. It can still be used to clang. You can bang it on a shard of clay. And it's Rav Yosef Brachanina, the one that says that it's roy lagabe b'mayim latinik. We have to reverse the original positions in the original machlekes. Why are you reversing the original one? The original machlokes evuch basraisa. Why don't you say this latter case by the Tumas Medres and Tumas Meis? Why don't you reverse the positions in the latter brisa? Mar says no, because Hashamina Leila Rav Yochanan the boy main malacha rishayin. Because we see from elsewhere that Rav Yochanan does require me'ain malacha rishayin, that it has to retain its original purpose. So we see clearly from elsewhere, from another brisa, that's Rav Yochanan's position. Must be that it's the first case where we said that the first case we had the machlokes of Rav Yosef Brachanina and Rav Yochanan. We have to reverse the positions by the bell. The Sanya, because we learned in a brisa, sandal shel behema shel matches tamei. It says that the sandal, if there's a shoe that's used for behema, is considered a kli and can be mekabel tuma. So they had, for instance, similar to what we have nowadays, like a horseshoe. They made a shoe, a sandal for a behema to protect the hoof from not getting injured, from stepping on stones or thorns, etc. But they made it not the way we made a horseshoe today. They made it in the form of like a boot. So it was made, the sandal for behema was made out of metal. It's tamei. Now, how can this be considered tamei? Why should it be considered a kli? A kli has to be usable for an adam, for a person rather. And there's no kli, there's no tachshit for behema that's makabel tuma. Tachshit for behema is not makabel tuma. So l'may chaze, what is the purpose that is used for a person that would make it, render it a kli to be makabel tuma? Amarav roya lishta is boy mayim b'molchama. Rav says because you can use it as a kli, to draw water with it, to use it as a container, as a cup. So it has a usable purpose for an adam. Rav Chanina Omar, roy losuch by shemen. He says it can be used for oil, to contain the oil, and use it for sicha. So apparently, Rav and Rav Chanina, they're arguing Rav's purpose is more common. Rav Chanina's purpose is not that common to use the losuch shemen malchama, even if it's a less common use. Rav Chanina apparently holds that is enough. So but Rav Yochanan Amar Bisha min hakrav. Rav Yochanan says that it's used by a person when he's running away from the battle. Manicha beraglov, he wears it, he puts it on his feet to protect it. Veratz al kaitzim v'barkonim, and he can run on the thorns and the thistles. So we see from Rav Yochanan's explanation of this brisa, we see how Rav Yochanan explains this brisa, that apparently he holds that it has to be for the original function. It was constructed, this sandal, for a behema as a shoe. Rav Yochanan says similarly the human application for it has to be as a shoe. So how is that? There are times when a person uses it, when he's in the battle, the soldier's in the battle, and he uses the shoe and he runs on the thorns and thistles, etc. So we see that Rav Yochanan holds that it's only considered a kli l'kabel tuma if the purpose that you made it for, if the secondary purpose is similar to the primary purpose. So we see that from this brisa over here, from Rav Yochanan's explanation of this brisa, we see that Rav Yochanan holds that the secondary purpose has to be similar to the primary purpose in order to consider the l'kabel tuma. So therefore, l'chayra, the way the Ritva explains l'chayra, that we would say in terms of retention, of retaining the tumah, we would say similarly that it's only considered a kli to retain the tumah if the secondary purpose after a kli is broken is similar to the primary purpose. So therefore we must say that we reverse the position in the first machlokes, that legabi the bell and the clapper, it's Rav Yochanan is the one who says that it's still considered tomei because royal akish legabi cheres, because it can still be used to clang on cheres. But Rav Chanina says that that's not necessary. He says hoel that it's royal legabi boy maim letinik. Now, in the explanation of this brayso, the Gemara says, "Ma bein Rav Chanina." What's the difference between these two that they're arguing over? To what's enough can mean between the two, whether it's usable for water as a container for water or for shemen? Ikebeinayu demois. If it's dirty, it's disgusting. So to drink from it, you wouldn't do it, but to use it to anoint with oil, then you would. So it's still considered a kli. It's considered a kli, even if it's mos, according to Rav Chanina, but not according to Rav. Bein Rav Yochanan and Rav Chanina, what's the nafkamina? Ikbeinayo the yakir, if it's very heavy. If we're talking about the sandal, this type of sandal is very heavy, so in such a case, if it's heavy, then you wouldn't be able to use it to run away with, to use it as a shoe, because it's too heavy to run with. So according to Rav Yochanan, it would not be considered a kli l'kabel tumah, but according to the others, to use it as a container to drink from or to have oil in it, it would be, and it is mekabel tumah. The Mishnah said, continue the Mishnah says, v'loi be'ir shel zahav, that a woman cannot go out with an ir shel zahav. What is an ir shel zahav? So Rashi explains that an ir shel zahav is like a clasp that's gold and it has engraved on it Yerushalayim. Taisus argues and he says, no, it's a crown. It's a crown with the engraving of the Yerushalayim on it. So my ir shel zahav, Rambam Bar Chanan Rav Yochanan Yerushalayim the dahava. Yerushalayim of gold. That's the way it was, the ornament. That's the way it was designed. Kira Ovid like Rabbi Akiva l'debesu, like Rabbi Akiva made for his wife, that in order to be mechazik her, that her father, Kaleb and Savua, did not want to support them because at that time Rabbi Akiva was not a Talmud Chacham, and he was mechazik her that he will buy her, he will give to her this ir shel zahav. Taisus points out that even though at that time there was already the gzeira that kalas cannot go out with crowns of zav in order for the churban, after the churban, they made this gzeira of a Torah shel kalos, but Taisus says that that is only for kalas, but not for other women. Other women could go out with it. According to Rashi, we're not talking about a crown at all. We're talking about a clasp. But according to Taisus, we're talking about a crown. However, he says that gzeira, the Torah shel kalas, is only for kalas and not for other women.